Lax safety measures, inadequate emergency response mechanisms, and scientists that tried to speak out but were silenced. Chernobyl was one of the worst man-made disasters in history, but the most shocking thing is that it didn't have to happen. Chernobyl was a disaster in the making right from the get-go thanks to some very poor reactor design decisions. Either out of vanity, a sense of competition with the West, or legitimate ignorance, the World Nuclear Association explains that Soviet scientists developed their own blueprint when building a device for Chernobyl dubbed RBMK, or High Power Channel Reactor. Chernobyl had 4 such machines, built in 1977, 1978, 1981, and 1983. The last reactor, number 4, is the one that melted down in 1986. RBMK reactors differ from others because of one key reason. They use water as a coolant and graphite as a moderator rather than use water for both purposes. Moderators slow neutrons down, which makes fission more likely, the fission that generates energy. This makes RBMK reactors more powerful, but less safe. By contrast, non-RBMK reactors intentionally sacrifice power for safety. When their temperature rises and water boils into steam, the machine becomes less efficient at slowing down neutrons because steam is a worse moderator than water. This reduces the likelihood of fission and prevents nuclear reactors from overheating, even at the cost of reduced power. According to the World Nuclear Association, RBMK cores therefore employ a positive void coefficient, positive in that power always increases. More steam produces more power that produces a higher temperature that produces more steam, etc. That's what happened in Chernobyl's reactor number 4 until it exploded and caught fire.
The chain of disaster is now complete.
RBMKs could prove disastrous even without any other risk factors. But lo and behold, Chernobyl's builders employed shoddy craftsmanship that only made an impending catastrophe more likely. In an interview with a Russian news outlet that appeared in Nature, Chernobyl director Viktor Bruhanov described how he had to intentionally cut corners to finish the project. If he didn't play ball, he'd lose his job. Looking to those cut corners, Chernobyl used regular electric cables throughout the plant rather than cords coated in fire-resistant materials. The World Nuclear Association also says that the plant's nuclear cores weren't properly contained and consisted only of a concrete-lined chamber sandwiched between 2 steel plates, one on top weighing 1,000 tons and another on the bottom. Meanwhile, Nature.com describes problems with Chernobyl's fail-safe measures, particularly when it came to the control rods in its reactors. Control rods help regulate the rate of fusion and are subject to automation depending on the needs of the reactor, but Chernobyl's construction allowed employees to manually remove too many control rods at the same time, which impacted automatic shutdown procedures and worsened reactor number 4's meltdown. In short, the plant had no safety culture, as the World Nuclear Association says. And so we come to the day of the disaster, April 26, 1986. Ironically, considering the safety problems, Chernobyl's reactor number 4 melted down during a safety system test. The procedure was riddled with a chain reaction of bad luck and incautious decisions that might have been preventable, even considering the plant's design deficiencies. Those decisions started with a factor that proved more critical than it might have seemed: the time of day. As the World Nuclear Association says, the safety test began on April 25th, a little after 1 a.m. It involved shutting down reactor number 4 and lowering its power along the way. But by 2 p.m., the plant had to maintain a power level of 1,600 megawatts thermal to keep up with demands of the electric grid. So the test was delayed and resumed late that night at a vulnerable point, a shift change. Meanwhile, the plant's emergency core cooling system, or ECCS, was isolated to continue the test. Though the decision didn't significantly contribute to the accident, an available ECCS could have reduced the impact slightly. For some unknown reason, likely human error, the operator let the system's power fall below the allowed limits of 700 megawatts thermal. At 500 megawatts thermal, the automatic regulating system kicked in, but power continued to fall anyway. Thus began a complex game of switching water flows, removing control rods, closing valves, and seeing temperature and steam pressure spike and drop. A mere 11 seconds before the chief reactor control engineer's final note at 1:24 a.m., the actuators in Chernobyl's reactor 4 lost all power. Finally, the reactor blew. When Chernobyl's reactor number 4 blew in the early morning of April 26, 1986, 186 local firefighters raced to the scene. They weren't exactly equipped with nuclear meltdown fighting gear, but at no fault of their own, As the Nuclear Energy Agency explains, Chernobyl employed inadequate, inflexible emergency protocols that were not up to the task of dealing with the situation at hand. This means that even after the reactor blew, the extent of its disaster could have been mitigated had the right emergency response mechanisms been available. Instead, Chernobyl's first responders showed up with no gas masks, no radiation suits, and wielding hoses used for spraying down any old local town fire. They arrived less than 5 minutes after the explosion, a testament to their readiness. But as they climbed onto the roof of reactor number 4 to hurl water down onto the 3,600 degree Fahrenheit fire, they stood in the way of toxic smoke, spewing 70 tons of uranium and 900 tons of graphite into the air. As firefighters fought the blaze from the roof, they were exposed to radiation that was 40 to 50 times a lethal dose. Within a few weeks, 28 people were dead from acute radiation sickness.
Firefighters who rushed in to put out the blaze weren't properly equipped and suffered radiation poisoning.
At least one scientist who tried speaking up about Chernobyl's faulty design was Valery Alexeyevich Legasov. Legasov was an award-winning chemist and first deputy director of the Kurchatov Institute of Atomic Energy, the institute that built the plant's disastrous RBMK reactors. While he didn't oversee reactor design directly, he was aware of its potential problems. And while it's unlikely that he envisioned a catastrophic meltdown on par with what happened in 1986, he tried speaking up about improved safety measures for the reactors. Legasov said during a meeting at the USSR Academy of Sciences several years before Chernobyl blew, "I, as a chemist, was worried about the huge potential for chemical reactions in these devices. There is a lot of graphite, a lot of zirconium, and water." In fact, he went one step further and pitched an improved form of shielding for the reactors, but his concerns were shot down. After Chernobyl blew, Legasov went on to deliver a 5-hour verbal report in Vienna in August that year regarding Chernobyl's causes. Amongst other things, he confirmed what we cited above: slipshod welding, pipework and valves, RBMK channel failures, and more. It took until 1990 for the Soviet Union to accept responsibility for the whole, fully preventable Chernobyl disaster.